Three, two, one. Hello and welcome to Just Talking with Aisha Dami Migueda and myself, Gwenda Lambert. We needed to do that little shake too because we've just been dealing with technology. We love it, don't we?
We do.
Um, which is great. So this is not live, but we are going to post this when we're finished. So
That's right.
this week we are going to complete our September, which was really about going with the flow. And luckily, October's got 5 weeks, doesn't it? I don't know. I'm
Yes.
just guessing.
Yes, it
Yeah,
does. That's why we can fit this last one in because we missed, yeah, last
beautiful.
week. Yeah.
So I'm just going to pass it over to Aisha because I don't want to touch anything else right now in case it goes crazy. Aisha, start us off, and it's fabulous to see you.
Oh, it's always good to see you, Gwenda. Thank you. So grateful for you. Lots of love to you, my dear. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this last week of the month of intention. We've talked about allowing, we've talked about resisting. We're talking today about going with the flow, and it really dovetails nicely with allowing and resisting because when we think about getting into flow, what that means is taking the path of least resistance. It's really allowing ourselves to kind of be like, I mean, flow is very much like being in a float state, right? You're not actually making a lot of effort to do things. You're kind of just stepping back and relaxing into what's happening. And that can be really difficult when things are difficult, when you're going through a rough time, when you're experiencing something where there's a lot of emotional energy involved. So, how do you get into the flow state? Well, the first way to do it is to get into a more observational stance. So, rather than trying to be active, proactive, or reactive, it's to kind of let yourself be observational and to look at what's happening around you and kind of look at it from a very kind of like a detached point of view, right? So we're looking at it from detachment and discernment, right? And Gwenda, you and I have talked about discernment in a number of episodes before, right? So we both know the importance of something like discernment, right?
Hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And discernment is really about making intentional choices of how you're going to engage with something. And when you're talking about how you're going to engage it, what you're thinking about is um, if you want to engage it, how much you want to engage it, how long you want to engage it for, and what kind of engagement you want to have. So it can be the difference between having a one word or a one line response to an email or having a 5 page response to an email, right? And you have to know, you have to make a discerned choice about what way you want to go and what's really going to serve you. Because if you're in a situation where you're expending a lot of emotional energy, you're expressing yourself a lot, but you're not being heard, then you have to make a choice about how you want to go forward in that, right? How much of yourself do you want to put out there? How much do you want to engage the other person? And if someone is shut down from listening to you, then what is actually the way to go forward? Have you ever had that experience, Gwen, that you've been trying to reach out to someone and they're just not hearing you or you're not hearing them?
Absolutely. I think, and again, the fact that you talked a little bit about detached, and I want to be able to um, maybe put a little bit more juice into that, and that is, um, whenever we have expectations of an outcome, or we tend to want to share our opinion without necessarily wanting to understand the bigger picture. Um, and so that's one of the things I think that, like, as you say, to be able to get it so that how much energy are you going to expend? How much are you going to put into that? The other part is what you're doing actually making things move forward? Like, what is your
100%.
intention? You know,
Yeah.
do you want to connect? Do you want to have a better relationship? All of us and any of the people that they talk about, all the recommendations is that ask people questions and find out about them. So there's a balance between I want the focus to be on you so that I, as Stephen Covey says, first try to understand and then be understood. But if you're never given that opportunity to be understood, that's where you have to make a discerned opinion to say, is 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 there anything that I can do that's going to make this move forward? And then that ties into the flow. But yeah, for sure, there's been times where I know I'm saying things, and as a little fire baby, sometimes it's a little too direct for some people. So I
Hmm.
try to temper that, but it's not like in my head, I'm going, okay, I want to hurt people. So for sure, that whole discernment and trying to do that as much as possible. Because the balance between watching all our P's and Q's, as people would say, and actually having, you know, an honest, heartfelt utterance, there's a balance there. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the context that you've put on detachment, because we're also not talking about emotionally shutting down. What we're talking about is actually being even more in touch with our feelings, but really understanding what's happening in the situation. So assessing the situation is very important, right? You want to be able to assess it. You also, I mean, part of this process of being of being in flow means being open hearted. It means being vulnerable. It means getting messy. It means um, understanding that you don't have control over everything and stopping yourself from exerting control where you might be getting in your own way and you might be getting in someone else's way, right? Maybe this is not your place to shine. Maybe this is someone else's place to shine, and you want to step back and give them that opportunity to do that, right? So it's also about recognizing what exactly what you're saying. What is my expectation of the situation? What is the outcome I'm expecting? If the outcome is only centered around your satisfaction, then you're constantly going to be pushing against the tide. You're going to be pushing against the current, right? And sometimes what we want to do is we want to recognize that, not everything is about us. Sometimes we want to step back and allow for things to happen in a different way. We can still get the same outcome, but for example, you have to kind of let go of control. Like right now, we were having technical difficulties. We couldn't go live to Facebook. So we had a couple of different choices. Well, should we postpone it? Should we try it later? Should we just cancel it? And Gwenda said, you know what? Why don't we just record it and put it up? Path of least resistance. That's the one thing that we knew was working. That's the one thing we know we've done before and it's been okay. Is it the ideal scenario that we like? No, not really. But you know what? It's okay. It's still, the information is still going to go up. We're still going to be able to have a conversation that you're going to be able to watch out there. You know, it's not a big deal, and it's taking that kind of urgency and that pressure off ourselves to say, let me just go with what's going on. Let me just relax into it. Let me find the way to do this that is the simplest and the easiest. And I know for me that often when I'm pushing against the current or pushing against what's happening, I don't end up getting the result that I want anyway, right? Gwen, have you
Mhm.
noticed that at all?
For sure. Oh, and I loved what you were. The one thing that I want to be able to add into there, everything that you're saying is perfectly right. And the great thing about it is that we can only, like, when we're communicating with other people, you don't want to insert their feelings or anything that they're responsible for. You can only talk about what you're responsible for, right?
That's right.
And
Yeah.
so if your main intention is joyful connection, or your main value, I mean, I think a lot of people, we do, what's our values, whatever. What's the intention of the show? We want to talk. We want to have this conversation about being in the flow. So sometimes it's hard to keep the ego out of what your actual intention is, and you need to keep the focus on the right syllable, the right syllable, so that we make sure that that we can take responsibility for what the outcome will be. um I don't know if that makes sense, but that's the part that stuck out to me, right? Is that a lot of times we can, um we push against things. We want to get flustered, and and instead we're giggling about this technical stuff. We're going, well, I don't know what this is, and I'm pressing buttons, and that's great. Now I know what further doesn't work, but we're still keeping a lightness about it, right? Because life is too short. And it is that kind of stuff that if we're getting wound up, that's telling us something about us. If we need to push against things to make them happen, then usually that's not necessarily the best direction or the right timing for us to be taking, right? So
Yeah,
that's
100%. Yeah, I love that you mentioned that about timing and about what's going on with us, because that's, I think, the other piece of it is really recognizing where we are with something, why we're having an emotional response to something is key in terms of getting into the flow. Because when you take some time to look at why you're having an emotional response to something, you also get to figure out if that's an emotional response that's coming from right now or if it's something that's coming from the past, right? And then that's something that helps you get out of your own way. Because if you're reacting in your head to something that reminds you of something or that activates some kind of memory from the past, then you can, when you're assessing it, when you're processing it, you can honor yourself by saying, you know what? Hey, this is not from now. This is something
mhm,
from the past, and I'm not the same person, and I'm not in the same situation. And I have choices about how I can respond to this situation that are going to be better for me than responding the old way, right? And that requires a lot of self restraint, but it also requires us knowing ourselves and getting to know ourselves and really understanding what are the situations that activate us, what are the situations that make us respond in particular ways, right? So we're not saying by any stretch to push things down or to not get in touch with our feelings. In fact, it's the opposite. It's really about getting to know ourselves on a really deep level so that also we can cultivate that trust in ourselves. And being in flow also means, with that vulnerability and with that letting go of control, it means trusting that whatever the outcome is going to be for the highest good, even if it's not what we were expecting, even if it's not what we wanted, even if it's not happening the way we want it to, right? Because we may still get the result we want, but it just looks different as the journey continues or as the process continues. And it's being open to that. So coming back to being, open hearted, and very important to process our feelings and to also determine how much space we want those feelings to take up, because you can be carrying a lot of feelings about something, about someone, about yourself, about a situation, and how much space you give it, how much
yeah,
weight you give it in any moment can determine how you're going to be able to get through it. And a lot of this is how we talk to ourselves in the stories that we tell ourselves. If we keep telling ourselves that same story, I'm not going to get through this. This is not going to work out. Things are always going to be difficult. Why does this always happen to me? Like, I know that feeling too. I've been through that as well, especially in this last little while. There have been days where I felt overwhelmed by what's happening and really resistant to what's going on. And in those moments where I could step back from it and just reach out to someone, it doesn't have to be a spiritual exercise. It can be an intellectual exercise, it can be uh, an emotional exercise, but to just step back and say, I trust. I trust
mhm,
myself. I know that I'm going to be able to get through this, or I trust my higher power, or I trust the people that are around me. It can be any kind of exercise that allows us to step back from something, take another look at it, try and shift our perspective, understand what we're feeling, make a decision about how much emotion we are going to carry in this moment. And even if you don't want to carry it in this moment, you can put some of that away and decide to emotionally process that at another time. Give yourself, like, you're honoring yourself just because you're not reacting to all your own emotions or expressing all your own emotions in one moment doesn't mean that you're shutting yourself down. If you're doing this in a way that's resonant for you, in a way that's peaceful for you, in a way that's healing for you, then you're making a choice about how much, how little, how long. You're making a choice about that emotional weight that you're carrying and dividing it up so that you're talking about a little bit of it at one time, but you're taking on more of it at another time, is a conscious and loving way to work through things and to be able to stay in flow. What do you think about that, Gwen?
Oh, absolutely. I think the thing that's interesting there is that a lot of times we put busyness into our life, right? And that is a distraction. That is something, um, like if you're going through a particularly difficult time, I think it's important to plan. So when it comes to the brain, we have what's called diffuse thinking. And so that's when we come up with creative ideas, we come up with solutions to problems that we're dealing with. So this is like part one of this. And so you need to, that's why we need to go for walks. That's why we need to dance. That's why we need to do something where we're focused on something else so that our brain can just do what it needs to do. But if we do not have the time for that, then, and this is the main point, when we do have these, something that's stopping the flow, or you have a thought like, oh, you idiot, or whatever, you have to be able to stop and go, okay, where's that coming from? And then, do I really believe this? Yes or no? And wait for the answer. And then, as you said, if it's like, well, I'm going to have to look in, like, where does that come from? Maybe it's an image that pops up. Maybe it's a person's face or your mother's voice or your husband didn't pack the dishwasher. I don't know what that is. But I think that the important part about that is that we need to be connecting, as you said, to what we're saying to ourselves. So for us, anytime that we talk ourselves out of something, that's interrupting the flow. If you can look at it, it's almost like little boulders are coming out of your mouth, right? Anytime you put yourself down, anytime you come up with an excuse. And I think the interesting part is there's the world of discipline, like, oh, you work through this, you pump through this. There's a difference between knowing when you're pushing your body and knowing when you're near the end of your emotional or physical rope when it comes to physical exercise, and when you're actually using those as a distraction to sit down and process something that might be emotionally challenging. And the funniest part is that once you do set that time aside, when you allow yourself to get into the emotional flow, it allows everything else. Everything else just comes quicker because you're actually saying, creativity comes with passion. So you can have an idea, but if you don't have the spark to push that idea, it's not going to get anywhere. And so, but yet there's so many of us, myself included, you have these wonderful ideas. You don't write them down. You don't take them out of here and make them, put them into the mundane world, into the real world. You don't write down your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions. So you can't really come back to those and embrace them because you're giving them, you're giving them less attention than you would paying your bills online, because at least paying your bills online, you have to sign into your bank, or maybe, God, remember those days where we had to like write checks, so you're giving that more time than you are your emotional well-being, right? And more,
Yeah.
you actually would sit down and have to do that transaction, but yet connecting with your own heart, and it's like, hey, that was a really weird thing that came up. Maybe I should investigate that at some point. So I think that gets in the way of flow as well. That gets in the way of us connecting with ourselves so that we can, instead of focusing on what's niggling in the back of our heads, we can focus on where it is that we want to go.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
sense.
Yeah, I love that. And I also love you making the distinction between what's happening inside and what we're prescribing to ourselves because we think that's what we're supposed to do, right? It's not about that. It's not about, oh, well, I should be better at this, or I should be doing it this way, or it's not about that. feel all your feels. Also, you know, it's a fine balance to recognize when the weight that you're giving your feelings is sabotaging everything that you're doing, right? So it's being able to get into that flow. So feel what you're feeling, think what you're thinking, and then make choices, deliberate choices about how you want to engage yourself and how you want to engage other people in that moment, right? So that you don't feel like you're a victim of of the situation, but you're also not a victim of your own emotions. So you want to
Mhm.
find that balance. And what's really important and what I love about what you said is that it's a feeling exercise. So for you talked about being a fire baby, I'm an air baby. That's something that I continue to learn is how to let my feelings come up in a way where I'm not I'm not intellectually cutting them all off because that's how I function, but to let them all come up and just feel them and try and be gentle with myself as I'm feeling them, and then make a choice about how I'm going to express them. And they don't always get expressed in a nice little bow. Sometimes they're messy, sometimes they're loud, sometimes they're incoherent, right? But now I'm figuring out how to make choices about what I want to say, because sometimes that incoherency needs another set of eyes. It needs another set of ears. And reaching out to someone that I trust and I care about actually helps me to work through some of the stuff that I'm going through as well. So being in flow is about a lot of different things, but it's really just about relaxing into it with trust in yourself, trust in the situation that's happening around you, with gentleness, with with acceptance in a way that sometimes things will work out in your favor, sometimes they'll work out the way you want, and sometimes they don't, and that's okay because somewhere along the line, something else is going to work out well for you, right? So it doesn't mean if one thing doesn't work out that everything is going to continue to go wrong, right? So it's little things like that, I think, about perspective and shifting perspective and functioning from intention that help us to get in flow and stay in flow. And if we can remember that, then even when we fall out of flow, it helps us to come back into flow. And it's always good to have someone that you trust and someone that you love to talk to. Like I have Gwen, I have a number of other friends that I can do that with, and they help me to do that, and we do that for each other. And so that's also very important to build that community that helps you to stay on track, because it's very easy, especially at this time with the ongoing pandemic, with the situations that have come up for people dealing with personal stuff, emotional stuff, family stuff, work stuff, all kinds of things are shifting and changing, kids, all kinds of things, right? And so we also want to remember that we don't have to do it alone.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't do it alone. We want to do it in community with people that we love and trust and care about, and we want to do it reciprocally with and for each other.
And just to add on, that's what I was saying before, is that when we have this diffuse thinking, when we have it where, as I would say, like when I was on my motorcycle, I was 100% on and 100% off at the same time. I'm aware of everything that was on that road, but it's like everything around you, there's so many things that are happening. And so it's not just about the riding part, it was about just being able to be on a country road and taking it all in. But then that's where you get your ideas. We get our ideas when we're in the shower, all this kind of stuff. There's also a really important thing that if we don't know the difference, and this is totally about being with the flow, is that like now I'm doing this grief recovery work. I love it. It's not counseling, it's educational, it's fabulous. I have learned more about myself and how I think because I'm allowing this process to happen, which is really like a spring cleaning of your emotions, is the best way I can put it. But the thing is that there was a lot of times, especially during the summer, where it's like, oh, I know I should be doing something, and then it was like, no, but it doesn't feel right. And that little, and those are little intuitive nudges. They're not big things unless you actually pay attention to them. It's like a child with acne, you know, you have a pimple here, all of a sudden it's this big on your face, but it's not, it's this big. And so, so when we get into that place where it's like, well, I have to do this because it's on my list of things to do, or it's, making sure that that list of things to do, bringing this back to the first statement, is it actually helping us move forward? And what is it that we're moving towards? Because, sometimes that target can change. We can still be in the same general vicinity, but because of the information that we're taking, it's like, oh, this isn't going to work. Okay, maybe it's time to just sit back and reassess or see how I feel about this or revisit this. And again, you got to give it longer than 5 minutes. But the big thing is that the difference in your body, that what that flow feels like, right? Because I know everybody asks us those questions in the seminars. They all say, well, when's that time when you lose all track of time? And it's like, but that's not the same for everybody. That's not, that can be if something that you're doing is, if something that you're doing takes you out of yourself, there's also a fine balance between, is it because I'm contributing to something outwards, or is it because I'm detaching or disassociating and making my focus all about somebody else? I know that's coming back sort of the first statements. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. And I think you're right. I mean, it also ties back into what's prescriptive, right? Like when someone says, oh, when is the time that you lose track of time? It doesn't always look the same for everybody. How you're in flow looks different to everyone. And what you want to think about is do I have ease in this situation? Do I feel like whatever I'm doing, it's happening naturally, right? Like I'm not feeling like panicked about it. How do I feel in my body? Will I feel easy? I feel relaxed. I feel comfortable. I feel like, yes, I can do this. This is the way it's going to work, right? And and this is different from pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, because that's a different thing that we're talking about. Specifically,
Yeah.
right now, what we're talking about is being in flow. And that really means finding that ease in any kind of situation, finding that comfortability, that relaxation, that trust, that feeling good in your body, like you're not feeling that tension, you're not feeling panic, you're not feeling urgency, you're just like, okay, I can do this. This is good, right? And then you see
Yeah.
when you're open like that, then more creativity also builds and it comes to you because you're open to it, right? And then the ideas start to flow as well. So yeah, so
And
I
then
love
you're
everything.
talking, yeah, and then you're talking to your friend and it's like, oh, and you know what? And it's like right out of your
Yeah,
head,
that's right.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
And one of those things is like, say you're talking to a friend and it was sort of like, hey, well, do you want to do this? And they're mentioning a place that was just in your mind. And you're like going, okay, that's great. That was just in my head. And this is one of the things I joke about it being the Psychic Friends Network. And we throw around words like intuition and things like that. But it's also being aware of what's going on in our minds when it's happening, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that if you actually pay attention, that you will have it. It's like, oh, I was just thinking of you, and they called. So that's about being in the flow, because then it's like, I'm also looking to co-create with anybody else that's here. I'm not the only person creating. Whatever I do affects other people or can affect other people. And being in that place, then all of a sudden somebody calls you and then they say, well, I'm interested in that. And it's like, okay, that's great. And that's after a morning thing that I say to myself, I know the people that need my help will come to me, and they literally do. And so this is the challenge with affirmations and actually knowing when you're in the flow. It's really good to have affirmations and things that you follow, things that you say, because that keeps your focus, that keeps you going in the right direction. But the difference is, as you said before, is that if it doesn't look exactly like we want it to look, we have to look at the intention of what it is that we're requesting. Because sometimes, most times, and see, let me know if this has happened for you, things work out even better than you could have even dreamed. Or it's like this little idea that you have because you said, okay, universe, let's go, let's do something with this. Then all of a sudden it turns into this big, huge, fabulous thing that we would never have come up with on our own because because other people are coming in and contributing. So, and on the other hand, when we get these nudges, when we are in the flow, and I talk about this with the grieving lady at Wendy's, where, you know, I came out of the park, I came out of a Wendy's, and I felt this wave of grief that literally enveloped me. And I'm like, okay, well, I know that's not my feeling. And so for any of the empaths watching or intuitives, that's intuitive 101, is how do we get it so we know what's ours and what's other people's, right? So I turn around and there's only one woman. And it's like, okay, I'm about to go talk to a stranger. Why? Because I was just given a pretty clear message. And that's what I did. So there's a difference between, now, does this mean that I'm comfortable talking to strangers? Well, to me, this wasn't a stranger. This was somebody that needed a shoulder at that point. So, but we need to, it's our responsibility to know how to plug in that antenna so that we can actually become part of the bigger community when it is that we're co-creating, and focus on the intention of what that co-creation is about instead of the expected outcome. And that's when flow blows your mind. What do you think, Ayesha?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that, you know, it's the more that we get in flow with ourselves, the more we get in flow with what's happening in our own situation, the more we're able to energetically go with the flow that's happening around us, right? Whether you want to call that empathy or intuition. I think that, you know, we're not meant to function in isolation. We're meant to function in community with other people and co-creating at all times. And for sure, we want to be able to create that path for things to come to us. And the more that we recognize what's happening within us, the more we can also be open to what's happening with other people. And we can see some of the stuff that we experience reflected back in what's happening with other people, which makes that connection even stronger, which makes it flow even easier, because you can look at someone and say, oh, you know, I've been there. Yeah, I know what that's like. Let me talk to you about that, right? So I love your story about connecting with that woman, because you were in flow. You were in that flow in the moment. You were open to receiving her energy, and then you were open to sharing energy back to her, right? And you were able to forge a connection out of that. And that really is ultimately what this is all about. It's about making that connection with ourselves, strengthening it, grounding it, clarifying it, processing it, honoring it, right? And then being able to take what we've learned and to share that with the people that are around us as well. And that's also part of being in flow. And that doesn't mean that being in flow is without fear. It doesn't mean you can have fear. You can be scared about things and still be in flow, right? You can be looking at a situation and think, I don't want this situation the way that it is, but still allow yourself to be in flow as you're going with it. Because if you think about water, water doesn't force anything. Water actually changes the shape of things by flowing around it or flowing through it. It deepens, it rounds, it softens, it smooths, right? And if you think of yourself as being in flow and being like water, then you give yourself that opportunity to affect change in a different way than perhaps you have in the past, right? And that's also a part of being in flow as well. So there's all these different elements that we've described about being in flow that anyone would touch on in different moments as we're going through whatever is applicable in that moment, right? So I absolutely love what you've added here, because I think it really fleshes out and really makes the whole idea of being in flow a little more substantial and more applicable in different situations, right? Because these are also a little bit abstract ideas that we're trying to we're trying to share them in a way that you can see where the connections are in real life and where you would apply them and how you would use them for your own better outcomes.
Exactly. And really,
Yeah.
I mean, because that's the thing. It's about keeping our mind focused on, you know, the thing, in the coaching world, it's always, when you're listening to people, they always tell you exactly what they need.
Yeah.
Always. Like,
Yeah.
they mention a word, or they have they say a statement, and it's like, see, you wouldn't have said that if there wasn't something there.
Yeah.
So let's go there. But you also have to be emotionally prepared to unpack that, because the thing is, if you look at it, it's like, I don't know why whack-a-mole is coming into my mind, because it has all the different holes, and there's
Yeah.
a mole in each of them. So the thing is that if there's a hole, there's no mole that can come up. So there can't be any engagement. And I know this is not the best analogy, hitting something on the head, but it's like, we need to be able to clean out those holes so that the stuff can work, so that our ideas can come up. And part of that is our emotional residue, if you would like, that changes the way that we think. If we've been hurt in the past and we haven't dealt with that emotional processing or feeling the feels from there, then that's going to get in the way and stop the flow of ideas coming to through ourselves, as well as to and through others. And the funny thing is that we may not be completely aware, but if you're paying attention to your thoughts, as we talked about before, something comes up and you see somebody's face, or you hear your mother's voice, or it will come to you. But if that's coming, then that's saying, hey, I need some attention, right? I need a little bit of attention, a little bit of TLC. Anyways, that's my 2 cents.
Absolutely. I love it. Well, that's great. All right. Well, I hope this has been helpful. I hope it's been resonant. Our talk today about being in flow, all these different elements. Please drop your comments below. Give us any questions that you have, and we'll be happy to answer them in the thread below as well.
Okay, we'll see you guys next week. We'll let you know through the week what our next month is going to be.
Yes.
Okay.
Exciting.
Thanks, guys. See you later.
Okay. Bye. Bye, Glenn. Love you.
Bye.